I did not even realize the party was for me until he tapped the glass, which should tell you something about the state of my marriage at that point, that I could be standing in my own living room surrounded by 30 people I barely knew and not understand why they were there. The house was full in a way it had not been in months, maybe years, with warm lights and music playing at that specific volume where you can still have conversations, but you have to lean in slightly to hear clearly. People were laughing, holding drinks Daniel had poured from bottles I did not recognize, acting like this was a normal Saturday evening and not something that had been planned without my knowledge or involvement. My husband, Daniel, was moving through the room the way he always moved through rooms when there were people to impress, shaking hands with a firmness that looked confident, making small talk that sounded genuine if you were not paying close enough attention to notice he was saying the same 3 things to different people in slightly different arrangements. He was good at this, at performing the role of successful husband and businessman and host, at making people feel like they were part of something important just by being in the same space as him. And I just stood there, near the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of wine someone had handed me without asking if I wanted it, trying to figure out why Daniel's business partners were in my living room on a Saturday night when he usually kept work and home carefully separated. Then he raised his glass, tapped it twice with the edge of his wedding ring, that specific metallic sound that cuts through conversation and makes people stop talking and turn their attention toward the source. The room went quiet. Not the gradual kind of quiet where conversations taper off naturally, but the immediate kind that happens when people have been waiting for a signal and just received it. I remember smiling, a little confused, but still smiling, because I thought I knew what was coming. An anniversary acknowledgement maybe, though it was not our anniversary. A toast to the company, though that seemed like an odd thing to do in our house. Something work-related that he wanted me present for, even if I was not really part of it? I was wrong. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, one of those slim professional ones that lawyers use for documents they want to look important, and he held it up like it was something to celebrate, like it represented an achievement people should applaud. "I have been working on something for a while now," he said, his voice carrying that practiced tone he used in presentations, confident and measured. And tonight felt like the right moment to share it with everyone who matters. There was a pause, just long enough to build anticipation, to make people lean forward slightly, waiting for whatever came next. Then he looked directly at me. Not with warmth or affection or any of the things you would expect from a husband addressing his wife in front of a room full of people, just a look that acknowledged my presence as relevant to what he was about to say. "For the past year, I have been restructuring my assets," he said, and I noticed he said my, not our, noticed it in the specific way you notice small grammatical choices that should not matter but somehow do. "Making smarter decisions for the future. Protecting what I have built." Something in my chest tightened. Not panic, not yet, just a feeling like I was slightly behind in a conversation I should have been part of from the beginning, like everyone else in the room knew something I had not been told. "And as of today," he said, still holding that folder up like a trophy, "everything is officially under my name." The room stayed quiet, but it was not the same silence anymore. It felt heavier, denser, like the air had changed composition, and I was the only one who had not been given time to adjust. I did not react immediately. I couldn't because my brain was still trying to process what he had actually said, was still trying to make it make sense with what I knew about our marriage and our finances and the basic structure of how we had built our lives together. Everything? That did not make sense. The house we were standing in, we had bought it together 7 years ago with money from both our accounts. The investment properties, I had found 3 of them and handled the negotiations. The savings accounts, the retirement funds, the stock portfolio we had been building since we got married, all of it had been ours in a way that was not just legal, but fundamental to how I understood our partnership. Or at least that's what I thought. People started clapping. Actual applause, genuine and enthusiastic, like they had just witnessed something impressive and worth celebrating. Some of them were smiling at Daniel, nodding with approval, and a few were looking at me with expressions I couldn't quite read, something between sympathy and curiosity. I looked around trying to understand if I was missing something obvious, if there was context everyone else had been given that explained why this announcement deserved applause instead of confusion or concern. Then I saw it. Daniel's business partner, a man named Greg, who I had met maybe twice in 5 years, leaning toward the woman next to him and whispering something. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could read his lips well enough to catch the important part. She had no idea. And just like that, everything clicked into place. This was not a party to celebrate something we had done together. This was a party to celebrate something he had done to me, and everyone in this room except me knew it was coming. I walked up to him slowly, not quickly enough to seem emotional or upset, just with the calm, deliberate movement of someone who has decided to do something and is going to see it through. I took the folder from his hand. He didn't stop me, probably thought I wouldn't understand what was in it anyway, probably thought I would flip through a few pages of legal language and hand it back confused. I opened it and started reading. Legal transfers dated over the past 11 months, ownership changes for the house, for 2 rental properties, for accounts I had helped fund, quitclaim deeds, transfer documents, all of it moving assets from joint ownership to his name only, and signatures, my signature on every page that required it. Except they weren't my signatures. They were close enough that someone glancing quickly would accept them as real, but not close enough to fool someone who actually knew how I signed my name, who knew that my capital S was always slightly wider than it should be, and that my final N had a specific hook that these signatures did not have. I closed the folder. Still calm, still quiet, because the worst thing I could have done in that moment was react the way he probably expected me to react, with anger or tears or any visible emotion that would let him frame this as me being irrational or unable to handle adult conversations about finances. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it sincerely, not because I was happy for him, but because in that moment I understood exactly who I was dealing with. Not a partner, not even really a husband in any meaningful sense, just someone who thought I was easy to outplay, someone who had mistaken my quietness for weakness and my trust for stupidity. The party continued for another hour. I smiled when people talked to me. I refilled drinks when glasses were empty. I played the role of gracious hostess while my brain was already several steps ahead, already thinking through what came next. The next few days were strangely normal. We had breakfast together like we always did, Daniel reading news on his tablet while I made coffee. We talked about small things, weather and groceries, and whether we needed to call someone about the noise the refrigerator was making. He acted like nothing had changed, like the party had never happened, like he either assumed I had not noticed the significance of what he had announced or had decided I didn't matter enough to worry about my reaction. And I let him believe that. I didn't argue or confront him or ask questions that would alert him to the fact that I was paying attention in ways he had not anticipated. Because once someone shows you exactly how far they're willing to go, reacting emotionally only helps them. It gives them a narrative where you're the unstable one, the one who can't handle reality, the one who needs to be managed. So instead, I did something else. I went back through everything. Not emotionally, not in anger, but systematically, like I was conducting an audit. Every document Daniel had shown me or asked me to sign in the past year, every conversation about finances or planning or restructuring, every timeline that now looked different with the new information I had. And the more I looked, the more obvious it became. He had rushed parts of it, cut corners in ways that made sense if you assumed no one would ever check closely. The signatures were the most obvious problem. Forged well enough to pass a casual glance, but not well enough to survive actual scrutiny. But there were other issues too. Dates that didn't line up properly, notarizations that looked questionable, transfer documents that were filed during times when I could prove I was somewhere else entirely. He assumed I wouldn't check. That was his fundamental mistake. He had built this entire plan on the assumption that I was either too trusting or too incompetent to notice what he was doing, and that assumption made him careless. A week after the party, I made one phone call, then another. Quiet conversations with people who specialized in exactly these kinds of situations, careful questions that got me the information I needed without broadcasting what I was planning. By the second week, everything was in motion. Legally filed disputes about the ownership transfers, fraud complaints regarding the forged signatures, requests for asset freezes while the investigations proceeded, all of it moving through proper channels, documented and official, and completely outside Daniel's control. He was at home when the first notice arrived. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard him open the envelope, heard the specific quality of silence that means someone is reading something that changes their understanding of a situation. I walked into the living room. He was standing by the dining table holding papers, his expression moving through confusion to focus to something like shock. "What is this?" he asked, and his voice had lost that confident tone he used at the party, had become flat and careful. I did not answer immediately, just walked over to the counter, poured myself coffee from the pot I had made earlier, took a sip, acting like this was any other Tuesday afternoon. "Read it," I said. So he did. I watched his eyes move across the pages. Investigation into fraudulent asset transfers, asset freeze pending resolution, ownership dispute filed with supporting documentation, his name highlighted throughout, his control suddenly very temporary. "You did this?" he asked, looking up at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not guilt, not regret, just complete disbelief, like he genuinely could not process the idea that I had actually responded to what he had done. I set my coffee down, looked at him directly. "You moved everything into your name," I said, my voice calm and even. "I just moved it back." "That is not how this works," he said, and now there was anger creeping into his tone, the kind of anger people get when something they thought was settled turns out not to be. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. "It is if the signatures are not real." The silence that followed was different from the silence at the party. That one had been performative, staged for an audience. This one was real. Heavy with the understanding that everything he thought he had secured was suddenly very uncertain. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled for him. Not loudly, not publicly, just systematically and completely. Accounts he thought he controlled got locked pending investigation. Properties he thought he owned became subject to legal disputes that prevented him from selling or leveraging them. The business partnerships he had been so proud of showing off started to quietly distance themselves, stopped returning calls as quickly, found reasons why meetings needed to be rescheduled. The same people who had been clapping for him at that party, who had smiled and congratulated him on his clever restructuring, stopped picking up when his name appeared on their phones, because no one wants to be associated with someone under investigation for fraud, even if they privately thought what he did was smart. And me? I did not celebrate, did not post about it on social media or tell friends or do anything that would turn this into a public spectacle. Because this was never about proving something to others or getting revenge in a way that felt satisfying. It was about correcting something that should never have happened, about making sure that the life I had helped build did not become something he could just claim for himself by forging my signature and throwing a party. In the end, Everything came back, legally, properly, through court orders and settlement agreements that put ownership back where it had been before Daniel decided to restructure our assets without my knowledge. Not some of it, everything, like none of it had ever been his alone. We still live in the same house, which I know sounds strange, but makes sense when you understand that selling it during all of this would have been complicated and expensive and ultimately unnecessary. Same walls, same furniture, same kitchen where I make coffee every morning. But something is fundamentally different now. Daniel does not make announcements anymore, does not throw parties or perform confidence in front of people, or act like he has everything figured out. He moves through the house quietly, carefully, like someone who has learned that the ground they are standing on is not as solid as they assumed. And me? I learned something valuable from all of this. I learned that I do not need to interrupt people when they think they are in control. I can let them finish, let them have their moment of certainty, because sometimes the best way to take everything back is to let them believe they already have it. Let them get comfortable and careless, and then use that carelessness to correct the record in ways they never saw coming.